Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm aware there's a pretty intense echo. Is the way I'm speaking right now audible? Yes? Okay. If we run into trouble, just let me know and I'll either slow down or perhaps even try to go off mic. I know the amplification does create a big echo. First of all, thank you so much for coming out this afternoon. We as a city government have a very significant decision ahead of us, and there is no possible way that we will get it right without significant input. It is a gorgeous summer afternoon. There are a million other places that you could be, but instead you're in a gymnasium, indoors, with the lights off, with a PowerPoint presentation about to happen because of your commitment to helping us together as a community make the right decisions. And I just cannot thank you enough for this. Before we get started, I want to introduce a number of really critical people who are either in the room or were involved in making this event come to be, who I think are going to be valuable for all of us to dialogue with moving forward. First of all, we're really lucky to be joined by two of our state legislators who are just back from a really historic and productive legislative session, or we hope about to go back to Springfield shortly to do more critical legislative work on energy issues, and we're just so lucky to have representing us in Springfield. Please give a warm welcome to Senator Laura Fine and Representative Don Gershowitz. Next, I am incredibly honored to be your mayor, and it's a pleasure when folks reach out to me with advice and ideas and suggestions about how to manage the operations of city government. But sometimes the person you really need to know is our city manager, who in many respects is kind of the CEO of the city and runs the organization, does a phenomenal job for us. Erica Scorley, you wave for the audience, please. Also from the city staff, we have Deputy City Manager Kelly Gandersky, Intergovernmental Affairs Coordinator and PowerPoint Slide Manager Evan Carter. We also, I see, have our Fire Chief Paul Paula in the back of the room. And then critically, in the back, in those tables, we have folks representing different city agencies who are here to share information, answer questions, take your ideas, and forward this dialogue. So we have Karen Danson-Lyons, the Executive Director of the beloved Evanston Public Library. We have Sarah Flax, the Housing and Grants Administrator for Community Development. We have Susie Hall, Management Analyst for Administrative Services. And then we also have some information back there from the Facilities and Fleet Management staff, the Public Works Department, and the Parks and Recreation. Finally, this event is happening in part because of very important constructive input given by our nonprofit organization partners who saw this opportunity that we're presented with as a city and said, hey, we, the nonprofits, want to be at the table to ensure that the city makes the decision as well as it can be made, but also it's not enough to have the city government and its nonprofit partners in the room. We want the community in the room too. So those nonprofit partners made sure this event happened, made sure that we reached out broadly to the community, and are a consistent presence in ensuring that the entire community's priorities are represented in the most important decisions we make. And so these nonprofits are the Evanston Community Foundation, Evanston Latinos, Evanston Early Childhood Council, Evanston Cradle to Career, and Northwestern University. I know we have with us from the Community Foundation Becca Carcaida. I know that we have from Cradle to Career, Mario Ramos. I also believe Dr. Liliana Fargo from the Latinos here as well. I believe Stephen Vick from the Early Childhood Council. Thank you to all of you for being here, and thank you to all of you, more importantly, for ensuring that our decision-making process reflects the totality of this community, its preferences, its beliefs, its values, its needs. Thank you so much. Okay. Oh, and not yet okay, almost okay. We're also pleased to have with us somebody who not only represents a ninth of the city on the city council, but in so doing will have a vote in determining how we deploy these resources. Please welcome the 4th Ward Council member, newly elected Jonathan Newsom. Okay, I want to pause a little bit as a self-conscious guy who hasn't stood in front of people with a mic for a year and a half. Can y'all hear me? Is it okay? Is the pace all right? You're not mad about it? No one's angry? Yeah? Great. Okay. Perfect. So if we could have the next slide, please, Emma. Thank you so much. Here's what we're here to talk about. The federal government, relatively early in the Biden presidency, passed the American Rescue Plan Act, an enormous and historic, critical piece of legislation designed specifically to help the country recover in many different ways from the ravages of the coronavirus pandemic. And one significant portion of that bill is direct aid to municipalities. And in fact, the city of Evanston winds up getting just over $43 million from this law. In fact, half of that has shown up already, is sitting in the bank, and the other half, another 21+ million, will come next year. And just to contextualize, we're going to have a presentation shortly that says much more about this, but just to contextualize, that's a lot of money. It's really, you know, as a mathematician, I always used to joke that it's really a bummer that million and billion and trillion all rhyme and can be tricky straight from one another and figure out what really is or is not a significant pot of money. For the city of Evanston, $43 million is a game-changing amount of money that gives us the generational opportunity to make investments that just are typically not even on the table. And so what we wanted to do today was have this discussion to begin, not end, but to begin the process of getting community input that will enable us to make this decision in a way that is inclusive, that is equitable, that brings in all the different points of the community, and most of all, allows us to do with this historic opportunity what is mostly in line with the desires of our community. And so I wanted to just kind of, for a minute, explain what this money can and cannot be used for to help shape our thinking for the rest of the afternoon. So there are 5 big categories of spending that this support is eligible for. And I think it's important to say, you know, we're having this conversation in a room together, something that would not have happened, you know, very, very recently. Illinois moved into phase 5 just yesterday, lifting restrictions on capacity for lots and lots and lots of different events and venues, has as summer is beginning, I think many people are kind of feeling like the pandemic is over. That's not quite true as a public health matter. We need to make sure we're vigilant, continuing to increase vaccination rates and still act responsibly from the point of view of potential transmission. But it's also the case, and I think it's critical that we name and remember that the damage that has been done by the pandemic is still with us. First and foremost, the people we lost. More than 100 Estonians from us. But there are many, many additional harms that our community suffered beyond that. People who have lingering physical health complications, even though they've perhaps mostly recovered from COVID. The significant mental health toll that the isolation, COVID, that the various medications we had to engage in imposed on us. The economic harms, both to our community generally and especially to many of the residents who were least positioned to absorb those economic harms. And so we need to see these resources as an opportunity to do a robust repair to all of that damage, with a goal, in my opinion, of not simply restoring us to where we were in February of 2020 before the pandemic had struck, but to really build the Evanston we have always wanted to have, a more equitable and more vibrant Evanston than we had before. And so with that in mind, there are these different categories of areas where the federal law explicitly names, hey, this is something you can do with the money. And so the first is supporting public health expenditures. And here I think, again, it's important to say that even as we see the current intensity of the pandemic at a low ebb, thank God, the mental health consequences are still with us. The mental health challenges that people have undergone, the pain that people have experienced, these are concrete and meaningful public problems, and it is, I think, important that the federal law envisions part of these resources being used to address those problems. Next, there's the question of addressing the negative economic impacts of COVID-19. And I want to dwell on this one for a second because I think it illuminates the kind of question we're here to talk about together. What does it mean to use some of this federal money to address the negative economic impact of COVID-19? Well, I think some people might first think, hey, look, if you go downtown, you see lots of empty storefronts. It's been an enormously difficult time for small businesses. Let's use these resources to support small businesses to enable them to ensure they'll get through the pandemic and be strong coming out the back end. That's a legitimate and important aspect of what this address negative economic impact category could mean. But it also could mean other things. Could it mean, for instance, providing childcare so that people can afford to look for and keep employment? Does it mean serious investments in workforce development? For instance, we have here Neil Campbell from the Mayor's Employment Advisory Council doing significant workforce development efforts. Does it mean investment in that kind of effort to ensure that we're creating a pipeline where individuals in Evanston who might have been disconnected from our economy instead will see a path into gainful employment? Does it mean investments in the built environment of our downtown to make our downtown more inviting and create more foot traffic and therefore more customers for our businesses? These are different potential answers, all of which make sense from one point of view, and we're going to have to make choices as a city from these options and others about how to deploy these resources. The next category is really simple. The city lost a bunch of revenue. We get a lot of our revenue through sales tax. You can imagine what happened to sales tax receipts during the course of the pandemic. Many of our revenue streams were impaired by the fact lot of sectors. We lost a bunch of revenue, it hurt our financial position, we wound up losing a bunch of staff as a result. One thing this law says is you can use some of the money to backfill that revenue hole and restore the headcount of your city government. The next example is premium pay for essential workers. We didn't lose headcount in the city, but we also kept a lot of people on. Some of them were able to work remotely during the course of the pandemic, but others were compelled to work in person, sometimes in unsafe situations with a risk of exposure to the virus. Another option available to us would be to essentially thank those workers who were in that situation with a premium pay. And finally, infrastructure. And I put some bullets on this slide because infrastructure means a trillion different things, but this bill is actually relatively narrow in how it defines infrastructure, perhaps because, as we know, the federal government is debating the potential passage of a separate major infrastructure bill, and so the anticipation is there may be more help coming for certain types of infrastructure projects, but this bill does say for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, and it specifically names the opportunity to use these expenditures to create resilience given the effects of climate change. And so that's another set of options available to us. I want to name some things that we're explicitly told we cannot use this money for. One thing is tax cuts. So you might say, well, hey, look, we're allowed to use this money to make up for lost revenue. Let's cut everybody's property taxes in half. We'll lose revenue and use the money for that. Might sound nice to some people, not allowed, I'm sorry. Another thing that we cannot use this revenue for is to put money into our pension funds. Another is to pay down outstanding city debt. Another is to put money in our rainy day fund. And I think that kind of explains what Congress and President Biden had in mind here. They're not trying to help us just pay for things that were already happening, except in as much as we lost revenue because of the pandemic. They're trying to help us figure out how to do new things to rebuild. And the choice before us is how do we select those new things in a way that's consistent with our values, that elevates the priority of equity, that we name all the time in the city as our top priority, and therefore that ought to inform critical decisions like this. And how do we do it as an enduring investment? Because the other thing to say is, I am not optimistic that in 2 years, the federal government's going to pass another bill that sends us another $43 million, and another $43 million 2 years after that, and another $43 million 2 years after that. So to the extent that we want to use this to start ongoing programs, that's going to create budget challenges for us down the road. I think instead the way for us to be thinking about this are what are long-term investments we can be making that support our priorities as a community, that we know will make a difference, maybe that we've thought about for a long time, but that we never quite had the budget move for because something else was always more urgent, more pressing, more of an emergency. We get now to think about that long-term investment question because we have $43 million of flexibility to think about it. And I'm really excited to hear the conversation this afternoon and going forward to ensure that we have the broadest, most diverse, and most creative collection of ideas on the table when we figure out how to make use of that historic opportunity. So again, thank you very much for being here. Our next speaker is the city's budget manager, Kate Lewis-Lakin. Absolute budget wizard who's been really my teacher as I've tried to learn more about the city's budget situations and details, who can help contextualize for us what is our current situation and how might these $43 million fit into it. Thank you very much.
but please give me a wave if I start going too fast. I know that that is my downfall in presentations like this, and I will try very hard to keep my pace at a good level for us here. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the city's budget, and again, this is something to sort of give us some context around what the city's current finances look like, what the dollar sort of numbers are, so we can understand where this 41 million fits in, 43 million, and what it can mean for the city, both in terms of our budget internally, as well as how we can leverage that money in some of these larger areas of investment in the city. So just as a quick sort of once-over, a couple definitions up front. The city's budget document is online on our website. There's some summary information up there. And you'll see these two terms come up a lot in our budget documents, anything we put out there. So the city's budget is organized into funds, and it's also organized into departments. Departments are what you're most familiar with. Those are the operating units of the city's government. So that is police, it's fire, it's the city manager's office, parks and recreation, health and human services, I'm forgetting which other departments here, community development, public works agency. Those are all the different sort of operational pieces. And those lay across what we call our funds. So funds are a financial unit that exists within our city's budget, and within all government budgets, governmental budgeting is done by funds. So just sort of when we talk about different funds versus different departments, that's a bit of the difference. And I'll go over what the major funds are in the city's budget in the next slide. So to give a scope sort of what the dollar amount of the city's budget is, we see around $300 million each year. So again, just hearing that number, we can start to understand that this 41 million is a very large dollar amount for us to get, right? That's almost 1/6 of our annual city budget. Last year's budget, the current year's budget, our number is $296 million. Again, it fluctuates up and down a bit depending typically on major capital projects or what's going to swing it one way or another around that 300 million number. I know this chart is a little bit hard to see on this slide. We will put all these slides on the city's website, so you can take another look at them later if anything that I'm saying didn't make sense or you want to take another sort of swing at what the images look like. But one thing to point out that I want you to see on this chart is that first third blue is our city's general fund. So that is the fund where police, fire, parks and recreation, community development are almost entirely funded out of the general fund. That is our main operating department of the city. And that represents about a third of our budget. And that's what we talk about a lot when you hear us talking about the city's budget, right? And having a deficit or a surplus or losing revenue or not, we're often talking primarily about the city's general fund. Another quarter of our city's budget, that orange bar over to the side, that's the other big portion, that's our enterprise funds. So that makes up our water fund, our sewer fund, our solid waste fund, and our parking fund. So those four funds, those also familiar to you probably as services that you interact with the city on and receive. And you also pay for those directly, right? You pay when you park the parking meter in a parking garage. You pay water bills on a monthly basis. There are sewer charges, solid waste charges that are added onto that water bill. So each of those funds are self-sustaining. Those fees that you pay for those services go directly to those services. And those are self-sustaining funds. And those are called our enterprise funds. We'll hear that term too. Some of the other sections are typically funds that have a dedicated use to them and dedicated revenue. So some of those categories are our library funds, our funds that are used to support our efforts in public library, which is a part of the city umbrella organization. Some of them are also our capital funds. So these are funds dedicated to doing our major capital improvements across the city. Again, that's an area where the budget can sort of fluctuate by year depending on the major projects. And then finally, we have what are just called special revenue funds. And that's funds like our CDBG, our motor fuel tax fund. These are often funds that come from a different level of government that have a very specified use that we have to track very closely. Another one of those areas is our tax increment finance funds, our TIF funds. But all of those are about 8 to 9% of the budget. So again, these are all sort of the smaller portions of the budget, incredibly important still in how we do our work and what kind of work we do here in the city. The next part is going to show a bit of a breakdown of our general fund. So again, our general fund is about a third of the city's total budget, and this is the fund where most of our general services come out of. So police, fire, parks and recreation, all of our administrative functions in the city are entirely funded out of the general fund. Health and Human Services, community development, public works, portions are funded in the general fund and portions are in some other funds as well. But within the general fund, you'll see that 61% of the expenses in that fund are salaries and benefits. So often when we're talking about the services that are coming out of that fund, it's city staff that are providing those services and that are the major sort of costs and piece of providing those services. Another, just you cannot recall, I know, that red portion is 20%, and that's just police and fire pensions. So our police and fire pensions are funded directly by property taxes, and that flows through our general fund. So 20% of the expenses in our general fund is actually that flows through pension funds. So that's another big piece to keep in mind when we're talking about looking at the general fund. And then finally, services and supplies. All the other things we need to do to run those services is about 20% of the budget there. So again, when we talk about the general fund, we have to have a lot of conversations around the number of city staff, the unions, the employment sort of situation of those individuals, full-time, part-time, what kind of benefits they are receiving. Just to sort of emphasize that is a huge portion of where the dollars in the general fund are going and what it means to talk about spending in that area. This chart I know is quite difficult to read on the presentation that we have. We've shown this in a number of other presentations, and again, I will put this up, but this is the breakdown of the general fund by department. So the largest department in our general fund by cost is our police department. That represents about 1/3 of the general fund's budget by expenses. The fire department is 23%, that's a quarter of the general fund approximately, and the rest make up that last third. So parks and recreation is about 10%, administrative services, which includes some of our parking operations, as well as facilities and fleet, HR, IT, many internal-facing services is another 10%. The city manager's office is about 5% of that general fund. And some of the other community development, city council, the city clerk's office are pretty small portions of that budget. Health and Human Services is very small on this chart, and that is because that department is about 3/4 funded out of the Human Services Fund, which is a new fund that was expanded a couple of years ago to really capture all of those services that we provide in the city and make sure that they're not always competing for revenue against these other needs in our city's general fund. So just keep that in mind as we look at some of these charts about which departments are where and how much are coming out of the different funds. I'm going to flip over now to talk about revenue for a moment. So this chart shows some of the sources of revenue into the general fund. Obviously, property taxes are what we think about the most when we think about the city. But actually, property taxes fund about 1/4 of our general fund. And again, a lot of those are getting are going directly into our police and fire pensions. Then we have another portion that does support city services in the general fund overall. Another portion is sales and income taxes. And as Mayor Viss suggested, sales taxes were pretty heavily impacted as part of the COVID-19 pandemic and the change in economic behavior that came from that. And we'll talk a little bit more about those impacts. But sales and income taxes account for about quarter of the revenue into the general fund. Other local taxes account for about 20% of the revenue into the general fund, and this covers a whole range of economic activity. One that you're probably most familiar with is our wheel tax. When you have to pay it used to be called the city sticker every year. Now it's digital, you don't have to have a sticker. So it's our wheel tax. Some of the other ones in this category are our hotel tax, taxes on hotel rooms in the city, fuel tax, athletic contest tax, and amusement tax. Events taxes, again, are typically based on some kind of economic activity within the city. Permits, fines, and fees charges are another 20%. The fines, fees, charges, this includes what you pay for parks and rec services, what you pay for ambulance service. If you have an ambulance trip, and either your insurance would typically get billed for that, as well as building permits, any sort of like permits you can get from our community development department or our health department in the city, and then fines as well. So parking ticket fines, citation ticket fines, any of these things. Those sort of all as a category together, where you're paying either because you're doing something or you didn't do something, make up about 22% of our city's revenue, our general fund revenue. And then finally, we have a portion that is inter-fund transfers. So this is support that the general fund gets from the waterfront, from the parking fund, from the super fund, some of these other funds where staff that are in the general fund support those operations in the city as well. We do some transfers from those into the general fund to support those operations. Talking a little bit more about property tax and the context around this. When you as an Evanston resident pay $1 in property tax, it goes to a number of different entities. And some of this information is on your property tax bill, but just to lay it out a little bit more clearly, this is the chart I'd like to show for this. So for every $1 of property tax paid in Evanston, the city of Evanston as an entity receives 17%. The next portion that's pretty small next to it is the Evanston Public Library, which receives 3%. So between the city and the public library, we receive about 20% of the property taxes that are paid in Evanston. The rest are going to different entities. A large portion are going to the 2 school districts in town. So 41% of the property taxes paid in Evanston are to school district 65, the elementary and middle schools. Another 26% of the taxes are to ETHS. And then finally, about 13% are going to Cook County and a few other county-level taxing districts. There's the Mosquito Abatement District, the Water Reclamation District, a few other of those like overarching regional services that are supported by property taxes. And then finally, here's a little highlight on our sales tax that is paid in Evanston. So when you pay sales tax in Evanston on any goods that are not grocery or prescriptions, you're paying a rate of 10.25%. Most of this is going to the state of Illinois, or a majority of it, 6.25%. Of that 6.25%, the city does receive a distribution back. It equates to about 1% within that 6.25. So we receive a distribution of that, but it goes to the state first. Cook County receives 1%. Regional Transit Authority receives 1.75%. And the city directly in our home rule tax receives 1.25%. So again, just to sort of spell out where are some of the places the city gets money right now, and how does that break out when you are paying for a good in Evanston, paying your property tax bill, paying any of the things that we know many of you do to support our work here in the city. Now I'm going to flip over into how COVID-19 impacted this framework, right? The city passed the budget every year. We passed the budget for 2020 thinking it would be a pretty reasonable year with pretty good economic activity, and that drastically changed on it come March of 2020, correct? So we had a fair amount of revenue loss that we attribute to the economic sort of retraction that took place as a result of the pandemic. So first of all, sales taxes. We experienced a loss of about $800,000 in revenue compared to 2019 from from sales taxes. Hotel taxes, this is again what we charge tax 7.5% on hotel rooms in the city. As you can imagine, we did not have very many people coming to stay in hotel rooms in Evanston, unfortunately, over the past year. And we saw a loss of $1.2 million from that revenue source. It basically flatlined from last year, was estimated. Parking ticket revenue saw a major loss there as well. I know that's not most people's favorite way of paying money to the city, but it is a place where revenue does come into the city and again represents economic activity in our downtown core and in our other business districts. Recreation program fees, unfortunately our recreation department had to really retract a lot of its activity and shrink a lot of what it was doing last year. It became incredibly creative in moving programs online, moving programs outside to different spaces, different structures than normal. But we did see quite a loss of revenue fee of recreation fees than we would in a normal year with a normal major range of programming that we provide. And then finally we saw loss across the board in our cultural taxes. Again, amusement, motor fuel, athletic contest taxes, these are again taxes applied generally to large events or economic activity in the city. We saw a large loss in that area, up to about $5 million in that area. So overall, from the general fund, we saw a loss of about $10 million in revenue to the city. So again, that's a portion of when we talk about the ARPA, this revenue loss piece, what we're looking at as how it impacted the city's budget last year. In this context, staff was able to implement a number of savings during 2020 last year that did make a big impact on how the city was able to work through the pandemic and make it out in a decent financial place. So the staff implemented about $6.8 billion in cost savings. There were staff furloughs and layoffs that took place. Many positions that became vacant last year were held vacant throughout the year, and we're only just starting to talk about some of those positions again. We delayed a lot of large equipment purchases, vehicles, other public works equipment that we buy in a typical year was delayed or held off on. We renegotiated many service contracts so that we could try and get better pricing, especially as it reflected areas where we had lower use last year, right? Many of our activities took a bit of a decline in how much we were using some of these contracts. We wanted to make sure the contracts we had with service providers accurately reflected that change in activity. And then finally, city staff was asked to try and spend conservatively across the board. This is always how we operate in the city. We know that funding is tight and that taxes are a very valuable source of money that we need to use carefully. And staff across the board was especially conservative last year and was able to hold the line in a lot of areas in our city expenses. And then finally, we actually had a few revenue sources that did better last year than we expected. So again, we did not come out of 2020 quite as much pain as we hoped due to some of these areas where the city was able to get benefit. The first thing is state income tax, and we're still figuring out a little bit why this happened. But we believe it's tied to the additional unemployment benefits that were given. But either way, the city received more in our state income tax than we had in typical years, and than we did in 2019. So that was an area of increasing revenue for us. Use tax also increased. Use tax is something that is applied to online purchases that come from out of state at the moment. That law actually changed in January 1st, 2021, so we won't see use tax anymore quite the way we used to. We'll get more sales tax on those purchases. But as you can imagine, there was a lot more shopping online during COVID, and a lot more that was coming in from out of state as a result of that. So that revenue source did go up as well. Third are building permits. This is where, again, you all as community members really helped your city in this regard, because many folks stayed home and did their home improvement projects. So we saw a huge increase in building permits last year, especially in residential, single-family, multifamily, folks living on home separate from the large ARPA grant that we are now discussing. These are typically specific to covering various public health expenses within our health department, within our fire department, etc. These, unfortunately, were not budgeted as revenue, but they also covered expenses that were not budgeted. But they took off some of the burden of those added expenses that we took on as a result of dealing with the pandemic. So I think that sort of wraps up the budget overview section of our presentation today. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take a break because you've been listening to me talk for a while. And what we're going to do is pull up a few rounds of questions that I'm going to run through very quickly. We'll leave them up on the screen and sort of flip between them halfway through. But after this break, we'll be moving to an open mic portion of the afternoon, where we will have an opportunity to come up to the microphone, talk to the mayor, talk to city staff this way, and give us your feedback. Ask your questions, tell us your concerns about what the city's doing with its money right now and what we could do with this money that we're fortunate to see come in the future. All right, there are handouts with the same questions on them. So the slides are not your only source of this information, so you should be able to view the handouts as well for that information. So the first set of questions is, how should the city divide the $43 million in ARPA funds between infrastructure, public health, economic impact, and city finances? So again, think about giving us some sense of what your priorities are between these areas. 2, how would you like to be engaged in the process of city budget and allocation of ARPA funds? We try and hold meetings like this on the budget every year. This is an awesome place for us to start. We're holding this meeting today, but it's not the end at all. We'll be holding more meetings, more ways of reaching out to people regarding these funds. And we want to know your ideas of how we can do that in the best way possible and what are the ways we can best engage the team. What areas of the city could most benefit from ARPA funding and why? Again, the understanding of what I showed of where our money is going now, what do you think are the best uses of it going forward? Number 4, assume that there will not be further grants. This is what Mayor was mentioning earlier. What are some self-sustaining programs that you would like cities to invest in to improve the community? What are ways we can use this money to best leverage it going forward? Because this may be our only shot at money like this coming into the city for a number of years. What areas of the city do you feel have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 or lack of city funding? 6, what infrastructure initiatives are important to you? And finally, how can the city invest in economic development in a way that will impact its residents? These are ideas. If you have other sort of questions, thoughts you want to express, you can think outside the box as well, but we want to give you these to sort of start your mind thinking, start the conversations going. And I think we'll take a 5-minute break. Okay, we'll be taking a 5-minute break now, and then we will come back and sort of run the question and answer, more interactive time portion of this meeting. Thank you all.
For those who would like to ask questions or provide feedback, there's microphones scattered around the room. All of them are on. Feel free to start lining up. I'll give everybody a minute or 2 to answer their questions or provide feedback. Make your way towards your seat or the microphones. Great. Also, staff is going to be recording, taking notes about the feedback that the community has, or compiling a report for city council.
Before we get started, I want to acknowledge two more people. First of all, he just left that time. All right. We have with us now another member of the council. I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to see. Council member Claire Kelly, the first ward. And then also with us, just stepped out of the room for a moment, is Dave Davis from Northwestern. If you don't know him already, you'll recognize him in the purple shirt, but he'll be back in a moment. And so with that, we're ready to take your input. So feel free to either come up to either one of the mics, or if you prefer, raise your hand and we can bring a microphone to you. Please go ahead.
Is this money
There you go.
available for the school system?
So go ahead. Let's all make sure we pay attention to the first comment. So please go ahead.
Is this money available for the school system?
What's that? The question is this money available for the school systems? And the answer is basically a qualified no. It's for the city government as opposed to District 65 and 202. And most of the items that are listed for ways it can be spent don't really fit with what the schools do, but there may be some flexibility, so it's worth keeping in mind. Thank you. Bonnie, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to input and invite community input. I'm Bonnie, I'm on here with my friend Adam Weiser. We're here today for people with disabilities. Who are part of Evidence Diversity, people with disabilities, who can be part of the economic recovery. There are clear opportunities to include people with disabilities in workforce development. The city can create paid internships. As a former internship coordinator in college, I know interns gain skills, confidence, and often jobs. My son's on the autism spectrum. He and other adults with disabilities are supported by a local nonprofit that's widely recognized as a model of best practices that are effective in futures. Before COVID, 85% of their participants were employed. Now, more than half are unemployed. That organization teaches job readiness skills, they provide job coaching. It has a wide Chamber of Commerce for internship opportunities. There's good research in qualities of employment, abilities. I have to read this one. Dependable, engaging, motivated, great attendance, high productivity. So I encourage the city to consider paid internships for adults with disabilities. There are resources available in the partnership with Center for Independent Futures. My friend Abby talked about his internship, the value of that employment.
Hi, my name is Adam, and I believe that people with disabilities deserve a paid internship. I remember when I was in college, I went to National University for 2 years, and I went to different jobs. I went through a couple of jobs like at National I went to Northwestern University, for example, and I was a busboy there for a couple of internships, and I also went to the Skokie pantry or whatever. And so I didn't get paid, but I thought it was important to learn different job skills because people with disabilities deserve paid internships. And I've been learning about a lot about job skills and about talking to people and about just learning new things. So that's why I think people with disabilities deserve paid internships. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
Good afternoon. First, I would like to commend all the people I see right here. Thank you for coming out. One of my main concerns, Council, is give your consideration to the programs for the elderly. I'm very concerned about the taxes that we pay and we get nothing back for it. I know that 41% of our dollar goes to education, and none of us have any children, including grandchildren, in schools. You know, when we apply, the first thing the city tells us is to go get a loan from the bank. Use some of this money to set aside for small landlords who have not received rent for over 2 years from deadbeat tenants. Set aside some money for elderly people and minority people in this community so they can have a livable experience, fix their basements, replace their windows and their roofs. Show some sensitivity to the people who have lived here the longest and paid the most money. Secondly, is marijuana considered a revenue source? If so, how much is the city bringing in? I'm very interested because 10% is supposed to be set aside for reparations. Thank you.
Yeah, I think your point about support for older adults is right on them. Can you all hear me like this? Yeah. All right. I think your point about services for older adults is right on the money, and I think there's a couple different categories in this bill that would just completely fit both the economic recovery and the public health. So I think that ought to be absolutely on our list. I thank you for that. When it comes to cannabis, the first $10 million that come in of cannabis tax will go into the reparations fund. Right now, we're still right around $500,000, so it's trickling in slowly. But there's some steps we're hoping to take, perhaps even working with Springfield to change the kind of dispensaries that we have here that might accelerate that revenue as well. That's important, as you say, both specifically for reparations and for the city's budget situation more broadly. So I appreciate you raising that. I think you're absolutely right.
Mr. Mayor and city staff, thanks for holding this meeting and thanks for holding it here in the new Robert Brown Center, new building that we all take a lot of pride in and reflects so well on our town. I'm hoping that when we distill a list of important priorities to advance these new revenues in, that we don't forget one of the things that's really distinguishing this culture for many years, which has been an artist-friendly and arts-friendly community. And this has not only affected the culture and the soul of Evanston, attracting artists and supporting artists and arts organizations has had a real economic impact on Evanston, not just generating revenue, but being an attractive place for business owners to put their businesses, as they know the kind of employees they're going to find in Evanston, because we're such an arts-friendly community. I think we all know that during the pandemic, people in the theater community and all the professions that surround them were totally out. I think we all know that musicians and all the professions that surround music events have been completely out of work. And I think we also all know that many people that make their lives in these fields pretty much live from gig to gig. So I think we are behooves all of us to keep our eye on some strategies to help support and revive and bring back and encourage arts organizations in that sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad you raised that because I think pretty much, oh, you can't hear? All right. Thanks. I think pretty much everybody knows that restaurants and bars have taken a tremendous hit and kind of first think about restaurants when thinking about some of the small business recovery money we might want to spend. But performing artists have taken just as severe a hit. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that when we're thinking about where to make these investments. Thank you. Over there next.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, so I'm almost 30-year resident here. My name is Rose. And I'm wondering before I make a plea for any certain cause, I want to know what the different needs are, what we're doing. I want to fly above it from a bird's eye scale. What are we doing? And if we take action on certain things, what will we not give? I'm passionate about the arts, I'm passionate about mental health, I'm passionate about making sure that older people who are disenfranchised get their fair share. But in order to make a fair decision in flying above it bird's eye, we need to know what are all the different things we're talking about, what are all the main ideas on the table. Secondly, does this need to be all spent this year? And lastly, are there investment vehicles in like mutual funds or whatever that we can put this into? Would be safer funds in the sense like if you're investing like in a college fund, there are safer things that have shorter time horizons. So I'm wondering all three of those things.
Great. So, first of all, thank you. There's another mic coming in a second. So first of all, I think we have to have a multi-step process. Part of what we're trying to do today is source a bunch of ideas, not with the idea that we're going to, by 5 o'clock this afternoon, say thumbs up on this one, thumbs down on that one, but to give ourselves that comprehensive view of the different options, and then have more of these conversations in a variety of different contexts to then say, here's where we are, here's what some of the needs are, and then here's some of the trade-offs, and now let's make some of those tough choices. That's number one. Number two, great question, my bad. No, we don't have to spend it all this year. I believe there's a 4-year block, so we have some time to make the investments. And then finally, regarding where the money sits, I think one core principle of public sector stewardship of funds is to absolutely minimize risk. And so I know that the funds are deposited at Wintrust. I'm not sure about the nature of the financial instrument, but I do know that ensuring principal protection is a core commitment. So we're not going to put the community in a position of saying, well, wait a second, there's 20% less money than we thought because the city messed up the investment. That's not an option we're open to.
So we can invest in mutual funds and other investment vehicles?
I don't think there's restrictions, but as a policy matter, we want to be really cautious to put the funds.
One quick thing on that, right start college funds, they have time limits. So you can go for less risk. So maybe you don't want to go for a 20% vehicle, maybe it's 5%. Then we have 5% for I need to go to your math person.
Used to be. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for hosting this meeting. My name is Tina Payne. My family has been owning and operating affordable units here in Evanston for over 50 years. There's been no help for us ever, and landlords like myself. Over the last 18 years, the city has only provided 77 new affordable units in 18 years out of over 2,300 luxury buildings. If you really mean what you say then you have to help the small landlords like myself and others. Because you're just pretending right now, because you're pricing out everyone. Luxury buildings is what the council has passed over the last 10 years. And 77 units is a farce. So if you really mean what you say, then you need to support small landlords. And we are a business too, not just restaurants, not just stores, not just the movie theater. If you mean what you say, then you need to support us as well if you want to continue affordable housing. Also, I hope that you do not spend $43 million, however you feel about Peter Robert Crown. But as you know, that's $53 million. That money can be used for a lot of things, not just for some developers that want to come here and use all the money. Please consider all of what we have to say today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think on some level you're almost understating the case, right? Not only are small landlords businesses, but they're operating under an eviction moratorium, under a changed environment. That's, I think, a sound and important policy, but then it creates additional pressure, which generates responsibility on the part of the public sector to figure out a way to support especially small landlords. I also just want to point out that your other comment is really important. There is what we call an inclusionary housing ordinance that is designed to generate affordable units in large developments. It's good that we have that. I support it. I support strengthening it. But if we think that that policy by itself is going to solve our affordable housing problem in Evanston, we are kidding ourselves. We've got to do more than that, so I really appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you very much, Ms. David.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
A little bit of research. According to national cities, ARPA funds can be used to reduce property taxes. It's an equity issue for all of us here. In a little background, a little calculation, every person you pay $6,600 in property taxes. If we were to allocate those funds to those businesses and people and individuals who pay property taxes, $6,600 property tax bill reduced by $950. In 1 year, for 2 years, for $1,800. So I'm urging you to give consideration of looking at increasing everybody's property taxes. Significant burden to all of us. It's a diversity issue, it's an equity issue, it's an inclusive issue. Thank you.
Thank you. My reading of the guidance from the Treasury Department is different, so let's follow up after and you can just help clarify how I can learn more about what you're studying. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barbara, and I don't know where to go, but I do think it should go where there is needed, and I don't think our community is so different from anywhere else that's usually affordable housing, healthcare, childcare. But I do want to point out a couple of things as we make these choices. One of which is that our COVID crisis coincides with a new awareness of inequity in policing crisis. And whatever we choose to do about mental health care here, it should be coordinated so that the police do less policing where they shouldn't be. So I'm not, it just should be coordinated properly. The other thing is that the question comes up there about self-sustaining programs. Most of the programs that are really necessary in a community are just not self-sustaining. If a Head Start, for example, a Head Start child care never sustains itself financially. I think this is a good time for Northwestern to make a commitment to help us sustain any new programming or institutions that we might need with this. Thanks.
Thank you. And those are important conversations to have. The one thing I would respond to specifically is I couldn't agree more with your point about the interaction between mental health services and policing. There is a subcommittee on alternatives to 911 response that has been led by council members Fleming and Ravel and has put forth a program to divert 911 calls when appropriate from police toward mental health care providers. That's a really critical first step toward what you're talking about. Thank you for flagging that.
I was born here in Edison, and my concern is for our youth. Before the beginning, COVID-19, I know your family members and young people, they're struggling and having a hard time with not the level that they should be in school. I think that some of the money should be used to start programs in Edison, in the schools, every school have some type of tutoring program to make sure that our students are up to the levels that they should be at, not continue to pass and they're not at the grade levels they should be at. We have businesses and some tutoring businesses here. There's one in Amsterdam Press. I checked on it for a family who's a member of mine that's a youth, and it's outrageous. There's no way I want a fixed budget I could help him. And I know that he did need the help and he's struggling. And then there's one in Skokie. I also checked that. So I'm sure across the CBS is outrageous. No one can afford those prices private free. So that's the one thing we got to do. The other is I hope that that money that has been given to the city of Epsom will be used to have a water stripping park somewhere for our youth in Epsom. Every park, every other city has swimming pools on their park or the water stripping. That was promised when they did the project at Church Street and McDaniel, and it was never, they didn't do it. It was promised when they worked on Begin Mason Park, and they did not do it. Our youth should have a water park, some type of swimming park. And also now, the third thing is with the police department. We've had several incidents going on in Edison. Some of you may not be aware that were very serious and still this last week. We need social workers working with the Edison Police Department, and they need to be aware that there are things going on within the community before they get to a point where someone's life's threatened to intervene and stop some of the events that's going on. Some of it's our youth, majority of it is some people from the outside that do not live in Edison. The fourth thing, I'd like to thank Connection for coming into Edison, for setting up these programs, and they're really helping people that need to be helped. I was one to get help when I was moving out. I did not have been able to get into an apartment that I had gotten because I did not have the security deposit. The paper rent, everything was signed. I needed the security. Connection came forward. I applaud them for working with people that really need the help and putting the money where it really should go. And I hope that that 43 million will also benefit where it should be put. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all great points. I want to just comment on the first one. You know, a system that expects families to find expensive out-of-school supplements to the learning that occurs in school, that's the opposite of an equitable system. And so when you talk about how unaffordable those various options were, that's not something that we can live with if we want to have an equitable education system. And so, you know, there was already a question earlier about whether it's even legal to use these funds to support what's going on in schools. I think it's an option we've got to keep on the table because of the exact reasons you outlined. So thank you very much for pointing that out.
Is this 43 billion going to be used only for the businesses that possibly have, or is this 43 billion going to be used for the same purposes people have been asking for since before the pandemic, for housing that is affordable for poor people, and the elderly, those
those people who are here, who are the basis for our basis. Is it going to also, I'm speaking on behalf of people, and I see this here, I cannot hear the acoustic, the people who left because they did not see, they could not hear, they did not ask for help, they don't know what it is for the important for the price, we got this. I'm wondering what it's going to do, what this money is really going to do. It's going to do for support for questions and questions for the mandate for this is only going to do for people who are running their business.
Well, the question had a few different components. First of all, I think that it's very, and please let me know if I'm characterizing.
No, I said that I could not see that, I can't hear that you're saying, and getting that very word else that I heard you saying. No, I'm not the person who cannot see.
The first part of the question is, listen, where is this money really going to go? Is it going to go to support just businesses that have a claim that they were hurt during the pandemic, or will it support the needs of other people in the community, needs that have been expressed since before we had the pandemic in the first place? I think that was the core of the question, though there were some other components too. Let me answer in two parts. Number one, I mean it when I say we shouldn't spend this money one way or another without actually getting public input. And so this conversation that we're having this afternoon is an important part of deciding how the funds will be spent. Two more kind of analogous discussions that we're having later this month will be important. But that's not going to be the end of it at all. As I mentioned to a question that came from over there, part of this is just we're looking for a bunch of ideas. And then we'll go back to the community and ask for ways to prioritize between those ideas. And so there is, I think it would be profoundly destructive for the city to have a plan already. I think we need to make a plan together that reflects the preferences of the community. To state my own opinion, I think it would be a terrible mistake to put all of this money towards support of businesses. I think that's the wrong way to go. I think we have an enormously broad set of needs, a very, very diverse set of challenges that people are experiencing, and the way we spend this money should reflect that diversity of needs. So that's my opinion, but I'm only one voice. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Other two meetings that we talked about, the one was Spanish speaking and online, or they're going to be an opportunity for three groups, 3 times. This is another time like this. The third time, and same thing, same meeting, for the people who speak Spanish.
So when I said 3 meetings, I was referring to this one, plus an online one, plus one that will largely be held in Spanish. But again, I want to stress, we're just getting started here. And there is, I mean, look, this is a great attendance. It's a beautiful Saturday. There's a ton of people in this room. It's very, very impressive. It's also not our whole community. We've got a lot of work left to do to solicit input. Some will be in big public meetings. Some will be in roundtables with individual groups and service providers. Some will be online. some will be in communications and writing. We're going to do a lot of different work to make sure we're getting input. And again, we're going to come back to folks and say, here's what we've heard so far. That leaves us with this choice, with this trade-off. How do y'all recommend that we approach that choice? And that's my commitment to you. We're going to come back and continue to have opportunities for public input.
Thank you. Thank you all the committee members for joining us at our meetings. Afternoon coming together. One of the things I would like to bring up, I know that the police department had a budget cut, so social services for youth is very important for families. I know that the therapy or the counselor was reviewed, or maybe the ratio was smaller the last couple of years. So implementing some type of a new service with the municipals, we have a contract with them, and being able to grow that opportunity of youth services through counseling or therapy if a police officer was called. So I know that there was counselors there in the police station, and the ratio has been smaller the last couple of years. We need to grow that. Another thing I'd like to make is unpacking the process for the money. I know half of it's already been, it's here. I know committees are starting to form. I know Ms. Rowley has put committees together within the city. It would be nice if such a talented community, skilled community, from our members who serve on those committee groups to ensure transparency. And lastly, I would like to talk about the digital divide. One thing that we noticed in COVID was when COVID first began and kids had to go to school or house, we had to solve that problem quickly. So it's been exactly 392 days since my first, mission and passion behind this. Been speaking with Luke Stowe, the CIO of the City of Evanston, and I'm giving him options and working through with the state of Illinois. And so now that we have this money, one of the things our question was, how are we going to put a digital divide together, get the $5 million grant in the state. Now we have the money. So I'm hoping that with the conversations at hand, Robert Crumb can house free internet service, digital services for small businesses and all the families in Evanston. We're only 7.8 miles, so there's no space. I mean, my internet can go 4 miles if I get my code. So really, this is an opportunity to truly be equitable in the digital world for Evanston school kids, for the elderly, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I spent years trying to talk about the digital divide, and there were some people who really kind of connected with those questions, and some people who were sort of didn't quite see what the big deal was about. One consequence of this pandemic is I don't think there's anybody left in this country who doesn't understand the significance and consequences of the digital divide and the way it creates inequity in education, in employment, in access to services, and more. So thank you for flagging that. I think it's an important place for us to look also.
Good afternoon. My name is Rose Johnson. I've been in Evanston now 50 years. 5 years. I paid my dues. I paid my dues. My name is Rose Johnson. 50-year resident of Evanston, Illinois. Community worker for many of us. I would ask that some of these monies, maybe a substantial part of these monies, be given to family focus. I have a vested interest in current chair of the Family Focus Auxiliary. I'm also a member of the board of the newly merged Chicago Child Care Society and Family Focus. The new name is Family Focus. Plans have been made for the repair and restoration of Foster School building, which houses Family Focus Evanston. were made by Foster Center Our Place, a group of concerned citizens from that community and around the city. And we shared it with the new Family Focus. The Board of Family Focus has decided to move ahead and looking at and considering our plans for the expansion and repair of that building. We have $1 million that has been set aside with state money several years ago, thanks to our wonderful Robert Gate and some others. Janice Council. So that board, the Board of Family Focus, is going forward, looking at considering those plans. Money given to Family Focus, Evanston right now, will help in fostering those plans to create a hub for nonprofits that are accessible to this board residents. And I cannot think, as a long time citizen of this community, I cannot think of a better place to put a substantial amount of money right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I think that Family Focus is itself such a treasure with such a history in this community. And of course, that Foster School is such an important historical building for this community. Obviously, that's a very, very powerful and appealing suggestion. So thank you very much for that.
Hey, okay. My name is Melissa Hamilton. I am with Interfaith Action of Evanston, serving homeless and hungry people. Over the past year, were forced to scale back on our emergency shelter system. And as a result, we had people living in parking garages. And so this need for a permanent 24/7 year-round shelter was made abundantly clear. I'm pleased to note that in this action plan that you agree, and I would add to that the need for public restrooms in downtown Evanston, because that again was made abundantly clear over the last year that there was no place for people to go. Then my final question is, how does this handout relate to the $43 million, and how are you moving forward with this particular action plan?
Well, first of all, thank you for both the work that you do and for the first part of your comment. This action plan was actually published on the last day of the previous mayor's term, and represented a lot of thinking that a lot of different people and stakeholders put in during the time of the previous council. And it's a really useful starting point, but I just want to stress that we're here today because it's not an end point, it's a starting point. And we just want to ensure that we do the work of soliciting public input as comprehensively and broadly as possible before we actually start sending dollars out the door. So I think it's a really encouraging document. It represents a lot of thought. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but it's a blueprint that needs to be amended subject to these kinds of conversations. So for instance, to give a really practical answer to you personally, the fact that there's something you like in there is good, but it's not done yet. And so we need to keep on advocating, even on issues where it kind of feels like we're heading in the right direction. There still have not been final decisions made, and I want to be clear to you about that. Whether you like what you've seen so far or don't, there's still room for further discussion, input before final decisions. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sita Paris. I'm a 52-year resident of this city. One of your questions was, how should the city divide the 43 million ARPA funds? The 2020 budget from the presentation, there was $6.8 million deficit. $5 million in unexpected revenue. That is in the 2020 budget. That leaves you with a $2 million shortage. Can this fund be used to cure that audit? First of all, the $2 million. Now, we are in 2021, 6 months into the pandemic. Again, you're expecting shortage. And some of this fund, the first priority should be to cure the deficit in our budget, current and past year, before undertaking any new spending project. Is that okay with everybody?
So the answer to your question is yes. The law is completely clear. These funds may be used to replace revenue that was lost because of the pandemic.
Hello, my name is Sandra Nagel. Thank you for having this meeting. With the pandemic and many people staying home, they were getting their exercise by walking in their neighborhoods. And going through the neighborhood with my husband who's in a scooter, I noticed many of the sidewalks are in really bad shape. I was hoping that that would be addressed because in your action area, it said support the development of healthy neighborhoods by collaboration between the health sector and community development. Encourage active healthy lifestyles by developing walkable neighborhoods. And so I would like some of that money allocated to the infrastructure of sidewalks because with 11% of the budget only going to help the city, I'm sure you're addressing the major issues.
Thank you for raising that. To me, your point about our sidewalk, the state of our sidewalks, it becomes an equity issue in two different ways. One is what you alluded to, that sidewalks that are either not in great shape or not there at all might be an annoyance for a young, healthy person, but they're an absolute barrier for certain people with disabilities and also for some older adults. So that's a fundamental equity problem where we are making our streets inaccessible to certain people. But the second issue is that I'm afraid, based on all the anecdotal evidence I've seen, is if you look around town and ask, what is the state of our sidewalks in different neighborhoods, you're not going to find the same answer in every neighborhood. You're just not. And so there's another equity problem that the traditionally disinvested and underserved neighborhoods of Evanston are the ones that need the most work when it comes to sidewalk repairs so they can be truly walkable, truly safe places for public health and also community building outcomes. So I think that's a great point, and there's a number of reasons why we would be helping ourselves and advancing our own agenda by addressing that problem. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Cindy Cooper. I want to thank you first for bringing the city government to the people. I think that should be done a lot more often in the public sphere. I want to amplify a point that Amanda here earlier about the importance of supporting the arts. I'm talking more about the concept of building back better and investing in the future. The arts, in and of themselves, are an important revenue generator. The businesses that surround them benefit from people going out to drink, restaurants, maybe even going shopping. I would really like to see a tourism site created for Evanston that focuses on arts, culture, and recreation. And to advance the idea of becoming a tourist in your own backyard, to educate the community about the tremendous resources we have here. And I'm also talking about a comprehensive calendar that lists every single event and every venue that's going on in Evanston. But on a larger basis, to attract people from throughout the region to come here and spend their money on the arts in Evanston. We have several theater companies here already. Northlight is coming in a couple of years. Movie theater will reopen. Hopefully we'll have another jazz venue. There's a lot to be gained from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't have much to add, but I think both from a cultural and from an economic standpoint, there's tremendous amount to be gained from that point of view. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Krista White. Almost 20 years right. And I just want to, thank you. I want to just underscore what you talked about, that the investments should really generate growth, single-time infusions. And I think there's a lot of ways that can happen. And I think as a resident, when you get to the end of this, or actually make proposals, I think to hold ourselves accountable to that, sharing how each dollar of investment, why you think it will yield growth, and in what way, what additional funds does it leverage or open up to our community as a result of those investments. I think of things like accessory dwelling units. There's a lot of tremendous models around the country, and when that ordinance passed, I think it was a year or two ago, I know I thought, and many people I know, that was out of reach for lower income residents in Evanston. And I think of an investment like this into that process would really help build generational wealth for families who may not otherwise be able to create those kinds of income generating revenue streams on their own. And so I just want to make sure that whatever comes out, that you're very transparent and clear about the additional growth that's reported, so it's very thoughtful and intentional.
Thank you, Ms. White. I think you're bringing up something pretty important, which is, okay, sure, Daniel, it's nice. You're going to ask us our opinions, you're going to ask us our opinions again, very good. But in the meantime, what should the city do to hold ourselves accountable to present the information in as clear and useful way as possible? So you raised the example of if we want to make these investments that will be sustainable, that will generate long-term benefit, how do we explain that to ourselves and others before making a decision? I don't think that's the end of that kind of thinking, right? Let's make sure that when we have a conversation about any of the ideas that have been put on the table today, we're really asking ourselves, what does this do for our equity goals? What is the fiscal impact of this decision? How will this make Evanston a more livable city? But I think we need to make sure that we don't just put a bunch of items on a spreadsheet and then have a haphazard voting process and move forward. Let's make sure that we think carefully and educate ourselves about a number of different consequences and ramifications of these options, and then we can really make an informed decision. So thank you for that.
Rob, you know? Regarding infrastructure, I often make a joke that if water was oil, it would rain. So it's really important, especially in this rapidly thirsty world, that we have our water system are in, ensuring that it can increase capacity, and that we make every effort to extend our services throughout northern Illinois as best we can. Regarding sewer, I attended, was witness a bunch of council meetings. There was always some guy in the sewer department talking about some pickle barrel with pitch on it that, was discovered somewhere that was 112 years old. Just like the engineering department really hone in, make sure that those things are, they don't continue to last. Those things are utilities. And what they do, and their effect is that they raise us all up. Right? So my last question, or my last comment is about broadband. And as you know, the space, digital equity, broadband and 5G isn't just for the big three telecommunication companies. And it's about time that the city of Evanston go out and really look into if 5G can become a utility for the entire city, meaning the digital divide would no longer be an issue. We all know that Evanston is in a position that we actually have a digital superhighway running through the city. So that other businesses are implementing 5G throughout the country for the benefit of their private companies. So one of the things I would encourage you is to bring your engineering department away from concrete and tree removal into this new area, and that we really address this at the source. Now, a lot of people who are worried about the effects of this, which will, in the long term, cost the city of Evanston revenue, could be replaced, maintain this. The city of Evanston has, a lot of forward progressive thinking, and if we align ourselves with that, we can address two problems. And we can clearly look at some of the revenue streams that we've already employed to pay for this long term.
Thank you. There's a lot there. I just want to quickly speak to the first part. You talked about our water infrastructure. We have aging, we have old water infrastructure. In fact, just a couple weeks ago in Springfield, they passed a mandate that all lead service lines be replaced over the course of about 35 years. That's a really important public health measure that they enacted. But we've got a lot of service lines to replace, which in some cases are nearly 100 years old. And that's going to be a significant project that's going to come with a real price tag. So I think it's important to include that on this list. So thank you.
Mayor Pierce, I just want to thank you for your enthusiasm about this project. I just love the into the air. That really, your commitment to this project and to getting as much as we can out of the $43 million that we're doing. But I want to address your question about the areas of the city that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. Because I want to acknowledge personally that I haven't been affected very much by COVID at all economically. I'm retired, I get my Social Security, I get my Medicare, I don't have to work, I don't have to worry about child care. I really wasn't personally impacted. I think there are a lot of people in this community who were economically impacted as well. They were able to work at home, they kept getting their paycheck, they were able to pay for child care for those children who were at home and not going to school. There are a lot of us who they need our help. They lost jobs because the jobs they were working in weren't jobs that they could do at home. They lost jobs because they had children at home and they couldn't afford childcare. These are the people that we need to help with this money. And if we can do that through family focus, then I totally endorse Rose Johnson's suggestion that a lot of this money go to family focus. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will say that I did wind up briefly airborne earlier on. On a personal note, I'm so happy to be around people. It's such a gift. So thank you everyone for choosing to be together this afternoon. It means a great deal. And I have nothing to say to the rest of your comments except, yes, exactly. If we spend this money without first asking ourselves what needs were created by this pandemic, then we're doing it all wrong. So completely, thank you, Rosie.
Yes, Mayor, I appreciate this opportunity for the community this afternoon. I'm intrigued by your observation that there are some places in the town where the sidewalks are kept up and some where they are not. And that connects me up to an earlier question about intergenerational wealth. Those places where the sidewalks are in good shape are places where persons have had access to well building and they have intergenerational wealth. Places where the sidewalks are not kept up are those places where persons have not had the same kind of access to well building and don't have intergenerational wealth. And so my hope is that as business owner and as a citizen, that funding your decisions will be something that you refer to. That is in response to the question, how do these funds impact not just what's happening now, but the long term? Where will these funds go to address those places where the sidewalks aren't in good shape? Because those are the places where we need to assist them. Be stable, residentially, housing-wise, building home equity, because that's a part of intergenerational wealth. And those businesses that are struggling, that are trying to establish themselves on a secure economic basis, they too can be streams of intergenerational wealth.
Thank you so much, not only for the broader point, which is of course right on the money, but for articulating how broad it is. It's not only about one narrow question. It's about businesses in neighborhoods that have been victims of disinvestment. It's about education in neighborhoods that have been victims of disinvestment. It's about economic opportunity. It's about safety. It's about public health. It's a holistic set of questions. And the sidewalk problem, as you say, is tip of the iceberg. And we better remember that when we think about where this money really needs to go. Thank you. It is 3 o'clock, so I'm going to ask anyone who's not yet out of mic to just talk informally after, but there's 4 of you who have already been in line, and I'm certainly going to stay here and take those questions. If others have time to stick around, I think it'd be great if the last 4 folks will get a chance to have not just me hear what they have to say. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think having you as mayor and town halls where questions are being answered is fabulous. So thank you, and keep doing that. I have a couple of questions. I'll try to make them short. Will there be a page that's interactive on our city site where people have such fabulous ideas in this town, where we can see what other people are thinking to broaden our thoughts?
It's a great idea. I haven't had a single conversation about it. My instinct is, yeah, we should do that. So.
That would be really great. And the question that I had when I first started was, there's a lot of things that don't know what the needs are and what the costs are associated with those needs. So it's hard to, I'd love to be able to kind of think about that. I also have wondering, what are other cities doing? The creative process that comes from people kind of collaborating is amazing. So I would love to see us have that conversation. Maybe we can get some good ideas. And then everybody who is speaking, just thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think all that is really great, and I've been on, calls with other mayors around the country or the region, and you're right, different people in different places are thinking about this in different ways, and borrowing or stealing ideas is always a good idea to at least consider. So we'll see if we can, there may be some resources to point people to, there's just examples of how other communities are making these through.
Okay, Daniel, I'm gonna watch it on a Toastmaster. Only got about 1 minute to speak. Daniel, some of the things that people, everybody's relevant, but it's my understanding that homeowners in Evanston, they're on the land of Northwestern University, and they are paying taxes that Northwestern does not have to pay for over 100 years. So when our rent goes up, if you're not a landowner and you're renting, you're still paying some of Northwestern's taxes. And until that goes away, some of the things are not going to go away that people are they're talking about. Because one of the things, sidewalks, that is relevant, especially to people that have wheelchairs and canes. I know because I'm a healthcare paralegal, I'm not going to introduce myself, but I'm saying I've been through this for people and for hospitals, including St. Francis, which went changed twice. And the alleyways in some of those places, but people don't realize the reason the city doesn't finish paying for it is because the hospitals and some large companies are responsible for paying half of the repair that they're not doing. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Sharon. And it's a consistent problem. We hear it all the time. There is a ton of Evanston that doesn't pay property taxes, and what that means is the rest of us pay more. So it's always going to be important to figure out what kind of arrangement we can enter with Northwestern being the biggest example to ensure that the city has the resources we need to do what we need to do. Thank you for that.
Hi, I'm Julie Torkman. I appreciate that you've already partially addressed my question, but it has to do with lead and water pipes. And the number of tests, a couple of years ago, there was extensive testing, and many of the schools had lead in the drinking fountains, many houses had lead, and the city did put together a program. There is a plan, and they have started, but it's like 20 or many years to get through the whole city, and it's an equity issue of lead in water pipes. It's not good for your kids' brain development. So I would just like to, I understand from what I read that we are allowed to use this money for upgrades of water and sewer systems. And even if we can't do the whole thing with the 43 million, it might allow us to speed it up a little and prioritize where we're having most of it.
Thank you for that. The plan that we're currently on is a 100-year plan to replace all of our lead service lines. Thanks to the good work of the Illinois legislature, we're now going to be on a quicker plan, but still not that fast a plan. The only other thing I'll add is that Senator Duckworth, through the subcommittee that she chairs, has really been focused on funding water infrastructure updates municipalities, and her plea, at least, is that there will be a lot for us specifically on this issue if, please God, a federal infrastructure package comes through. So we need to really push everyone. Obviously, Jan Chakowski, Dick Durbin, and Tammy Duckworth don't need a lot of pushing from us, but anything to do to help move that along will be critical for our community.
Some of this money to
Yeah, thank you. Well, as I said, this is a start. We are trying to get ideas and populate a list, and that is just one step, but there's going to have to be a number of additional steps before we finish this work. The only one other thing I want to say to Esther is, I might have either misspoken. I want to be really clear about this. The federal money can be used to replace revenue we lost because of the pandemic. If we got $5 million less in sales tax revenue last year because no one was out buying stuff, then we could take $5 million to replace that lost revenue. But we cannot use the money to just pay down debt we had anyway. So if we issued bonds 5 years ago, we can't pay that off. If we have pension debt, we can't pay that off. We only can use it to replace money that we lost because of the pandemic. So thank you for pointing out that I wasn't clear about that. That distinction is going to matter going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thanks for having this event today. I do want to reinforce the issue of workforce development within the city. That's one of the things that when you look at what the new normal is, we can either let it happen or we can make it happen. And I'm much more impressed with the idea of making workforce development work for the entire city. I'm talking just about high school students, people that are out of work. Because everybody knows we have businesses, right? Businesses are employers. They pay people to work for them. With what's coming up in the next couple of years, especially with what we learned in the pandemic about new ways people can work, we really got to come up with a good strategy. I know that's in your action plan. I would definitely support putting something forward, getting that right workforce development right in the city for the long run.
Thank you. And our final speaker.
Okay, hi, I'm Allie Harned, and I am a school social worker for Washington Elementary, right across the field there. And I just want to say, as a school social worker, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I want it to be on record, that I hope that there is very good, robust, meaningful collaboration between the city and the districts here in Evanston, where their children need educated live, because we have to do something to reverse the bleed of families that are living in Evanston because they can't afford to live here. It's not sustainable in one way or another. It's only gotten worse with COVID, but it was something that started before. And so anything, we talking about me. Try to stand still. Okay, so anything that we can do to help with families who have intersectional vulnerabilities. It's not just housing, it's not just mental health, it's not just people that those things. We have to wrap around those families. Specifically, a use of the funds for the wrap around funds. I think that that's something that we really have been advocating for years. So if some of the funds were used for that, that would be great. And I want to be like a plus 4 for municipal broadband. I've delivered a lot of hot spots around town, sometimes 2 or 3 times because it didn't work. So that's something that's just an absolute huge. And then shout out for, I don't think it's been mentioned, universal basic income.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for your patience. It's 3:20. You've been here for 2 hours and 20 minutes. You've heard enough out of me, but just remember, this input is critical. It is one of many steps. Thank you for your commitment to make sure we get this right. We're going to continue calling on you and asking your opinion, and I hope you'll be so generous